Hey everybody, this week we're moving on to talk about one of the most important writers in the history of the English language, Geoffrey Chaucer. And I'm guessing that you've got at least some familiarity with the Canterbury Tales. Perhaps your high school program had you memorize parts of it. I know that was true for me, and it's on the reading list for a lot of reasons because of it's really in an important time between and transitioning between that medieval period to the early modern period, which is the English Renaissance, which is where we're going to move after we take the midterm. So for now, I want to talk with you about one thing in particular about the writing program that we're working on, and some suggestions I have for your work, and also things to keep in mind as you're reading through the general prologue, of the Canterbury Tales. So let's start with this writing assignment. So for this week, I'm asking you to do something a little more different, a little more creative and expressive to get your mind going on how you can look at a big picture of a big text, and then find different points of comparison within them. So there are several characters laid out in the group of pilgrims on the Canterbury Tales. What the assignment calls for you to do is to pick two of them and to compare them along a single point of contact. Now, I mentioned this single point of comparison for this reason. What you can do in these assignments sometimes is you can list all of the information about, let's say, the knight, and then you'll have quotes in there and well supported, and then you'll say all of the information about the squire, quotes in there and interesting points, but then they'll never actually cross to where you're saying, here's why they're important in this conversation together. And so the work that you have to do in your writing is show me why we should think about the knight and the squire, or the parson and the yeoman, or whoever you pick, in terms of why they matter. So finding that single point of comparison and then looking at it. So what you would do in this assignment is to say, essentially at the beginning of your post, the knight and the squire are similar in this category, but they do it in different ways. And so that's how you can see how the comparison and contrast ends up being not about two separate things existing, but two separate things existing in a specific comparison. So as you're doing that, you want to make sure that you're giving equal weight to both of your characters. So what can happen in this assignment is, let's go back to our example of the knight and the squire. I'd get a good 300-word paragraph about the knight that explains all the details, and the squire I get like a really 75-word, and the squire does some interesting things because he's going to be a knight one day. That's not an actual comparison and contrast. That's a really deep exploration of the knight and then a reference to the squire. What I'm looking for is that same level of deep exploration between the knight and the squire, or between both characters. And if that sounds like too much for a shorter writing assignment, remember, I'm not asking you to compare them broadly. I'm asking you to compare them on a specific point of comparison. So finding some way that they're similar, either by their calling, their dress, what their expectations of culture are on them, and then writing your paper around that idea is going to help you stay in control of the information, to keep this from being two separate summaries. Now, you'll notice that I said here about quotes is try not to use, I shouldn't say do not, summary. Like, you don't have a big text narrative here where you're summarizing action like you have in Beowulf or in Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. You're dealing specifically with the characters themselves, and in some cases, not a lot of lines about them. So use the quotes to help you build this assignment. And finally, it's linked on Blackboard. I've sent it to you in many of your comments, if not everyone, because it's just such a helpful resource, the SEAL method. It helps you stay in control of the information, which is that, just a reminder, you state your argument, illustrate it with a quote or paraphrase, explain how that quote supports that overall statement, and then linking to the next argument. In this case, you're not going to be linking as much as just closing out your thoughts. So keep all of these things in mind as you're writing this assignment. And I'll add to that a really good idea, which is to go ahead and write it as soon as you can so that you can leave yourself some room for revision. I tend to believe, outside of just writing, but life, because I don't really do as much in the academy anymore as I used to, but I work in business, I have a family. I've learned so often that life is revision. That it's very rare that we're going to get everything right the first time. And we've got this mistaken idea that we're going to write everything, we're going to get it all out, and it's going to be perfect. And if we just do a lot of work on the front end, then the thing that comes out will be perfect. What often happens, and really what may always happen, is that we build as we go. And then we build something and it's about halfway there, and then we revise it. Then it's about 75% there, and then we revise it. Then it's about 95% there, and we're like, okay, now we're really getting there. And that's where those percentage points can come from. So I would suggest, rather than reading, thinking, and then waiting until Friday to write the assignment, go ahead and start writing it so that you can build in some time for revision. I think you'll find that to be really helpful. So let's move on to talking about the Canterbury Tales as a text in and of themselves. And so some background on the text, since we don't have a good introduction, I'm going to link the Wikipedia page about the text there in Blackboard, so you can just get some general information about Chaucer and what this text is doing. But some key things to keep in mind as you're making these points of comparison is that this is really one of the key examples of establishing English as a literary language. Now, in the history of the English language, we've worked through parts of it with Old English poetry and with Beowulf and with some of the Middle English things we've had at this time. So English history is just a history of people being conquered, right? The Latins came in, the Romans came in and moved folks out as they conquered. Then the Anglo-Saxons came in and moved the Romans out. Then the Vikings came down from the north and the French came in from the east and they moved the Anglo-Saxons out. And so what ends up happening is that English ends up being this hodgepodge of languages. And really, since the Norman invasion of 1066, you have this idea that English is the language of the common people. It's your getting around language, but not really a literary language, because the language of the church at this time is Latin, and the language of the courts, the people who were running things, is French. But Chaucer here, being an excellent scholar and an excellent writer, really establishes English as a capable literary language. And everything that we read from Chaucer forward leans on Chaucer's establishment of this importance of the English language. And we think about it as literature. Literature is always up to something more than just telling a good story. It's always asking, at least good literature is asking us to think deeper about our motives and to think about virtues and things that we might want to do. So, and a lot of times you'll have something along the lines of satire. Now, I wouldn't call the Canterbury Tales a straight satire, and we'll read one of those later, which is Gulliver's Travels, where it's designed to specifically look at something in a different way. But I think that in Canterbury Tales, satire is woven in and around the text. So the question that you need to be keeping in mind is, should I take the narrator, the speaker, at face value? Or is Chaucer, through that speaker, trying to work in some sort of criticism, right? And you see it specifically with Chaucer in his criticism of the people of the church. He goes after them pretty significantly because of the things that he sees that they're doing that are wrong. So keep that in mind as you're reading, that you might be looking at something that looks like one thing, but if you turn it just a hair, it's going to actually reveal something else, and what Chaucer might be getting after with that imagery. And finally, you'll see that in the Canterbury Tales, the pilgrims are broken into three major categories. You've got the fighters, the church, and the workers, or those that fight, those that pray, and those that work. The fighters are early on in the prologue, they're introduced, and then you have the church workers and the working class interspersed throughout the prologue. Keep this in mind for an important reason. What are these people supposed to do in society? How is a knight supposed to serve the kingdom? How is a squire supposed to act? How are the church people supposed to act? That's a really key one for Chaucer. What do we see in the workers who may not have the same social categories? Sorry about that, guys. The downside of filming in an office is that you have phone interruptions. So anyway, so thinking about each way that they carry a specific role that they're supposed to be doing. So the workers, they're expected to work, but maybe not be all of that culturally significant. But how do they show virtue that we might expect from these other higher categories? My final suggestion to you for this assignment and for this text is have fun with it, explore. This is a brilliant text, and you're getting to read it in translation, but there's still some difficulties between the way that the translation of Middle English works and the way that we talk today. That's okay. That's normal and to be expected. Read through, try to understand. You'll get introduced a little bit more to what Middle English looks like next week when you dig into the Miller's Tale. But for now, I think you'll really enjoy this information, this text, and what all you can learn from it. So good luck, have a good time. Always reach out if you have any questions.